I mean, it's,
They're going to do that.
yeah, that's, I take that's what she told me that.
Yeah.
The following video documents one man's journey to become JFK. Mike Lowe from Boston, with no formal training in theater or stage, has for the past 4 years endeavored to bring John Kennedy's voice and speeches back to life. At an early age, Mike recited the speeches and voice of John Kennedy and has shared that passion with audiences in Boston, New England, and beyond. Join us on a singular, personal, and very private struggle as Mike tells his story about remaking his persona into John Kennedy. This transformation from an unknown citizen to JFK is an American story. It is one of hope, confidence, and imagination. Mike's attempt to bring this dynamic and charismatic figure of the 20th century back to life is audacious and unprecedented. As we begin to commemorate the 50th anniversary of John Kennedy's life in the White House as president, Mike hopes to bring this historic figure literally back to life. Good evening. My name is Ted Zaleski. I am the historical interpreter of Teddy Roosevelt. But tonight we're going to be meeting Mike Lowe or John Kennedy. You decide who we meet this evening. Mike, how did it all begin as a boy for you and John Kennedy?
Well, when I was a boy, Ted, I was born in 1950, so I was 11 years old when the president was elected, and he was Irish. I was Irish. He was Catholic.
You're Irish and you're Catholic.
I'm
okay.
Irish and Catholic, and that was the initial connection.
And did you have a chance to meet him as a boy?
No, no, I didn't. But after he was elected, but before he took the inaugural address, my family went down to Hyannis. He was scheduled to leave the compound. Quite a few people were there. It was very exciting. It was a scheduled departure. And the president left, and I happened to be right within a line of sight. The car went right by, and I did get a chance to see him, and he did get a chance to wave.
Did he wave just to you?
I was the only person in the world there right then.
Wow,
and
wonderful. And then tell us how you started to listen to his tapes. And
after he died, probably 1964, 1965, my mother purchased a 33 1/3 LPN record, and it was called John Kennedy in Memoriam, and it was his greatest speeches. And as a little boy, I used to listen and mimic and listen and mimic. Of course, those speeches are now available in MP3s for anybody that wants to listen
And
to
could
them.
you explain what a record is for our young audience?
I think that's a matter for somebody to Google.
Oh, all right. And did you perform in front of anyone then?
Well, as a kid, as a youngster, no, not really. But I did perform in front of high school friends and in college, and a lot of people would ask me to get up, and the president's memory was still very fresh at that point in time, and people would ask me to get up and perform.
And how did people respond to your impressions?
Well, I found that my mother's friends in that generation, and I look back on it now and I recognize that they were a part of John Kennedy's generation. And of course, there were no MP3s or videos or audios. Of course, there was very little technology, so it wasn't. They weren't able to see John Kennedy again or to hear him again, for that matter. So it was primarily in front of that age group. There was great enthusiasm.
And then the next step, the professional step. Can you explain some of that?
Well, I in my 20s. After the 20s, I listened to the speeches, but I never professionally knew that there was an avenue or a way to develop and become a professional performer by reenacting historical figures. So I kind of went dormant, and then in the when I was in my 50s, I decided I wanted to try and get up and see if I could bring John Kennedy back to life professionally.
Now, you want to try something right now?
Before
you do, let me do mine.
Go ahead.
Bully. Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, here's John Kennedy talking about being a Catholic. I hope that no American, considering the really critical issues facing this country, will waste his franchise or cast away his vote by voting either for me or against me because of my religious affiliation. It is not relevant. I am saying to you that my decisions on every public policy will be my own, as an American, as a Democrat, and as a free man. That would be an example.
You have my vote, Mr. President. We have some clips here today, and I don't know if they're quite ready, but let's see you performing as Teddy Roosevelt. John Kennedy, I can't get out my own character here.
Right. What I'm going to do here is, right off the bat, just to give people an idea of what it was like to have Jack Kennedy campaign, we're going to listen to 3 very short versions of Kennedy in a campaign mode. And the first little short campaign speech that I'm going to do is one in which Jack Kennedy invokes previous presidents. And here's what he said. Woodrow Wilson's New Freedom promised security and succor to those in need. Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal promised new economic structure for this country. But the new frontier, of which I speak, is not a set of promises. It is a set of challenges. It sums up not what I intend to offer to the American people, but what I intend to ask of them. It appeals to their pride, not their security. It holds out the promise of more sacrifice instead of more security. It appeals to those who are young at heart, regardless of age, young in spirit, regardless of party. It appeals to those who answer to the scriptural call, be strong and of good courage, be not afraid, neither be dismayed. For courage, not complacency, is our need today. Leadership, not salesmanship. And the only valid test of leadership is the ability to lead and lead vigorously. It would be easier to look to the safe mediocrity of the past, to be loved by low intentions and high rhetoric. But those who prefer that course should not vote for me or the Democratic Party. That's a little bit of Jack Kennedy on the campaign trail. Thank you. Thank you very much.
And Mike, what kind of an orator was he? Obviously, we saw you do it, but could you explain a little more about what kind of an orator he was?
Well, I think if you had to sum up his oratory in one word, it would be forceful and inspirational. And I think it was primarily as a result of his great love of history. And there was passion in his voice because he had traveled so extensively and he understood the history of the world and the unique place that the United States had in the world, particularly after World War II.
And explain the use of his hands. I was always impressed with that.
It wasn't a conscious effort. It was strictly an unconscious reaction. It's the only way he could make a point, and it was primarily with the right hand. It was always always chopping. And even I see some speeches where he's in the Oval Office and delivering a speech in the Oval Office, and even then he has his hands, on the desk, and he's still moving that right hand. So it was kind of an unconscious effort, and he kind of made it a little bit famous. And some people say Bill Clinton and a few others may have even imitated
it was very strong. Teddy Roosevelt always made a fist. And he would shake too, and a very strong speech maker. And he connected emotionally with people. Is that true, you think?
Well, Kennedy, people, even those who may not have voted for him, when he spoke, they listened. He commanded the room. There was no two ways about it. And there was nothing phony about what he was saying. It was from conviction, and it was heartfelt. And I think that was as a result of being with his speechwriter for so long, Ted Sorensen. He was with Ted for 10 years. And I think that the two of them were so comfortable together after a while that every speech was almost tailor-made for him.
Well, let's see him once again.
Okay.
Reverend Rock, I am grateful for your generous invitation to state my views. While the so-called religious issue is necessarily and properly the chief topic here tonight, I want to emphasize at the outset that I believe that America faces far more critical issues in the 1960 campaign, the spread of communist influence until it now festers just 90 miles off the coast of Florida, the humiliating treatment of the president and the vice president by those who no longer respect our power, the hungry children I saw in West Virginia, the old people who cannot pay their doctor's bills, and the families forced to give up their farms. In America, we're too many slums, too few schools, and too late to the moon and outer space. These are the real issues which should decide this campaign, and they are not religious issues. For war and hunger and poverty and despair know no religious barrier. But because I am a Catholic, and no Catholic has ever been elected president, the real issues in this campaign have been obscured, perhaps deliberately in some quarters, less responsible than this. So it apparently has become necessary for me to state, once again, not what kind of church I believe in, for that should be important only to me, but what kind of America I believe in. I believe in an America where the separation of church and state is absolute, where no public official either requests or accepts religious instruction on public policy from the Pope, the National Council of Churches, or any other ecclesiastical source, and where no religious body seeks to impose its will, either directly or indirectly, upon the general populace or the public acts of its officials. I believe in an America where religious intolerance will someday end, where all men and all churches be treated as equals, where there's no Catholic vote, no anti-Catholic vote, no block voting of any kind, and where Catholics, Protestants, and Jews at both the lay and pastoral levels will refrain from those attitudes of disdain and division which have so often marred their works in the past, and instead promote the American ideal of brotherhood.
Mike, John Kennedy was the first Catholic president, and since then we have never had a Catholic president. When he gave this speech, would you set it up as to what he was doing?
Well, it was the dominant issue, believe it or not, in the campaign, was his Catholicism and his age, and in the fact that he was so young, and his Catholicism. And the Houston Ministerial Association, Baptist ministers, they invited John Kennedy to come to Houston to address them, to address the religious issue. Kennedy's advisors told him, don't go. And they said, if you go and you make a mistake, no other Catholic will ever become president. And if you go, and even if you do well, they're going to find some fault with what you say. So his advisors said, don't go. He went, in any event. It was an example of him using the greatest attribute that he thought was in human beings, and that was courage. And he knew that he had to go and address the ministers. So he went, and he effectively took the issue off the campaign trail at that point in time. It was no longer an issue after he delivered that speech.
And as a young man, I do remember that speech. And at the time I was a Protestant. Eventually I became a Catholic, not because of him, but, and I remember that was in the church talked about all the time. And explain a little more how he persuaded him. What did he say?
Well, after the speech, 15 minutes was open for questions from the floor. He addressed every question. Some of them were acrimonious, confrontational. He handled those. And during the speech, it's not in that clip, during the speech he said that when he was a PT boat commander and his PT boat got split in two, nobody cared that I was a Catholic then. And he said, when my brother Joe was on the B-29 Liberator bomber over the English Channel, nobody cared that he was a Catholic then. And Kennedy then addressed the audience directly, and they were Texans, and he said, I visited yesterday I visited the Alamo, and side by side next to Bowie and Crockett died Fuentes, Bailey, DeBelio, and Carey. But nobody knows whether they were Catholic or not. There was no religious test there. So effectively, he put them in their place.
He knocked off those Texas boots.
Yes, he
sure.
did. Yes, he did.
And then after he talked with them, he sort of held a press conference with these ministers.
Right.
Could you explain a little of that? What happened
Well, it was a 15-minute open question and answer period. He addressed each and every question fully. He didn't leave until they were exhausted, until they had no more questions. And one of the funny stories was he was addressing the group, and he had on a blue suit, as I do tonight, but he had brown shoes. Somebody left the the black shoes in the plane. And John Kennedy was a meticulous dresser, so he felt very uncomfortable in the fact that he was in brown shoes and a blue suit. And his wife had said, it's too bad they're picking on Jack's Catholicism because he's not even a good Catholic.
And then what happened, say, when he became president? Was he a practicing Catholic?
Well, he was a practicing Catholic. In fact, he prayed every night. He knelt and prayed every night, believe it or not. And many of his speeches made references to God. And the inaugural address, there were a couple of instances where he did. And in the civil rights speech, he always asked for God's providence. So I wouldn't say he was overly religious. However, Sorensen and Kennedy together brought religion to the forefront.
Let's see another clip.
January 20th, President now is 43 years of age, youngest man ever to assume the presidency. Very, very cold day, Washington, D.C. It's almost like a New England day at this point. Snowfall the night before. Jack Kennedy delivering the beginning of his inaugural address. This is what he said. We observe today not a victory of party, but a celebration of freedom, symbolizing an end as well as a beginning, signifying renewal as well as change. For I have sworn before you and Almighty God the same solemn oath that our forebears prescribed nearly a century and 3/4 ago. The world is very different now, for man holds in his mortal hands the power to abolish all forms of human poverty and all forms of human life. And yet the same revolutionary beliefs for which our forebears fought are still at issue around the globe. The beliefs that the rights of man come not from the generosity of the state, but from the hand of God. We dare not forget today that we are the heirs of that first revolution. So let the word go forth from this time and place to friend and foe alike that the torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans born in this century, tempered by war, disciplined by hard and bitter peace, proud of our ancient heritage, and unwilling to witness or permit the slow undoing of those human rights to which this nation has always been committed and to which we are committed today at home and around the globe. Let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe in order to assure the survival and the success of liberty. This much we pledge and more. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. There's a place in England, 20 miles southwest of London, called Runnymede, R-U-N-N-Y-M-E-D-E, Runnymede. And that's an area in which the British have set aside 185 acres in memory of an event that took place there in 1215. And the Magna Carta was signed in Runnymede in 1215, and that's the original charter, the Great Charter, the Charter of Great Liberties, and it's the charter that gave birth to our United States Constitution and Bill of Rights. And within that 185-acre site that the British have set aside to commemorate that particular event, after President Kennedy was assassinated, the British government deeded 1 acre of land to the United States. It's U.S. territory at this point. So we got 1 acre out of the 185 acres. And on that site, there's a John F. Kennedy Memorial, because the British government recognized that President Kennedy recognized at every opportunity that great first great charter, the Magna Carta, and then the English Constitution that followed, and then the United States Constitution that followed. And on Portland stone, in our 1-acre U.S. territory in Runnymede, the following words are, "We shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, in order to assure the survival and success of liberty." So I invite each and every one of you, the next time you're in Runnymede, make sure you stop by and see the Magna Carta Memorial, and also see the John F. Kennedy Memorial.
Mike, just to go back to the inaugural speech, can you sort of put the speech in the setting?
John Kennedy, after he was elected, when he was president-elect, Arthur Schlesinger Jr. told him, what you should do is you shouldn't prepare the speech too early, because now that you're president-elect, you're going to begin to feel the burdens of the office, even though you don't hold the office, and you should wait until as close to the inauguration as possible before you begin to prepare it. And that's just the advice that John Kennedy took. He asked his chief speechwriter, Ted Sorensen. Here's what he asked Ted. He said, "Ted, I want you to go back and read all previous inaugural addresses. And I want you to find out what was good, what made them powerful, and try to incorporate them in the one that I'm going to give." And he also said, "I want my inaugural address to be very brief. If we can use one word instead of two, that's what we're going to do. If we can use an action word, we're going to use an action word." And that was the order that he gave Ted Sorensen. And he and Ted Sorensen worked in collaboration to produce that speech.
Was it a cold day, or?
Yeah, very much so. In fact, it was like a New England cold day, January 20th, 1961. Very cold, and the president, John Kennedy, really orchestrated the whole inaugural address. He knew where the cameras were. He knew when he was delivering a certain line which cameras would be on. He flew up to New York to work with the production crew. And he had the seating arrangements. He made sure everybody sat in certain places. He wanted no children on the podium, and a lot of his advisors and family, they wanted their children to be there. He wanted a very dignified affair. So he set the whole stage, and in fact, he even had his mother and his father sit in the second row far away from him. He didn't want his father behind him while he's delivering the speech.
Briefly tell me about, after the speech, he tipped his hat to his father.
While he was in the inaugural limousine, as he was going by the reviewing stand, his dad was there, and he stood up and tipped his hat to his dad, and his father did the same thing to him. It was a little acknowledgement to father the son. I did it.
And let's see another clip. Thanks. I always remember that tip
beautiful.
of the hat.
It's beautiful.
In the long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its hour of maximum danger. I do not shrink from this responsibility. I welcome it. I do not believe that any of us would exchange places with any other people or any other generation. The energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it. And the glow from that fire can truly light the world. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. My fellow citizens of the world, ask not what America will do for you, but what together we can do for the freedom of man. Finally, whether you are citizens of America or citizens of the world, ask of us here the same high standard of strength and sacrifice which we ask of you. With a good conscience and a clear mind, with history, the final judge of our deeds, let us go forth to lead the land we love, asking his blessing and his help, but knowing that here on earth, God's work must truly be our own. Now that's it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Mike, one of the most memorized phrases in American history is "ask not Where did that come from?
Well, there are several different variations of that. It's not uncommon in historical literature to have a leader of a country, a leader of an organization, the leader of a tribe, the leader of a group say, you should be doing more for the state, and you should be doing more for ourselves than yourself. And Oliver Wendell Holmes, as Chief Justice, he delivered a speech in which he said, not exactly in President Kennedy's words, but that you should be doing more for your country rather than the country doing something for you. So it's out, and it has been in the historical literature for some time. And many historians think that John Kennedy may have read this and subconsciously brought it in. In fact, during his acceptance speech in Los Angeles, he said a similar phrase to that phrase right there. So.
I can't think of any similar phrase except maybe malice towards none and charity for all. And,
from Lincoln, yeah.
From Lincoln.
Yeah.
Let's see another clip right here coming up.
2,000 years ago, the proudest boast was Civis Romanus Sum. Today, in the world of freedom, the proudest boast is Ich bin ein Berliner. There are many people in the world who really don't understand, or say they don't, what is the real issue between the free world and the communist world. Let them come to Berlin. There are those who say that communism is the wave of the future. Let them come to Berlin. There are those who say that we can work with the communists. Let them come to Berlin. There are even a few in Europe and elsewhere who say that even though communism is an evil system, at least it allows for economic progress. Lass nach Berlin kommen. Let them come to Berlin. Freedom has many difficulties, and democracy is not perfect. But we have never had to put a wall up to keep our people in, to prevent them from leaving us. I want to say to you, on behalf of my fellow countrymen who live many miles away on the other side of the Atlantic, who are far distant from you, that they take the greatest pride and that they have been able to share with you, even from a distance, the story of the last 18 years. I know of no town, no city, which has been besieged for 18 years that still lives with the vitality and the force and the hope and the determination of the city of West Berlin. While the wall is the most obvious and vivid demonstration of the failures of the communist system for all the world to see, we take no satisfaction in it. For it is, as your mayor has said, an offense not only against history, but an offense against humanity, separating families, dividing husbands and wives and brothers and sisters, and dividing a people who wish to be joined together. What is true of this city is true of Germany. Real lasting peace in Europe can never be assured as long as one German Info is denied the elementary of free men, and that is to make a free choice. In 18 years of peace and good faith, this generation of Germans deserves the right to be free, including the right to unite their families and their nation in lasting peace with goodwill to all mankind. You live in a defended island of freedom, but your life is part of the main. So let me ask you as I close to lift your eyes beyond the dangers of today to the hopes of tomorrow, beyond the freedom merely of this city of Berlin, or your country of Germany, to the advance of freedom everywhere. Beyond the wall, to the day of peace with justice. Beyond yourselves and ourselves, to all mankind. Freedom is indivisible, and when one man is enslaved, all are not free. When all are free, then we can look forward to that day when this city will be joined as one in this country and this great continent of Europe in a peaceful and hopeful globe. When that day finally comes, as it will, the citizens of West Berlin can take sober satisfaction in the fact that they were on the front lines for nearly 2 decades. All free men, wherever they may live, are citizens of Berlin. And therefore, as a free man, I take pride in the words, Ich bin ein Berliner. Beautiful speech. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, as Kennedy was wont to do, and many people aren't aware of this, but I've read books written by Ted Sorensen, Kennedy a lot of times had a prepared speech, and he had a prepared speech at that point in time. And that was mostly extemporaneous. He took the prepared speech, you get up there, 200, 350,000 people. The place was raucous. The wall was right behind him. He was viscerally angry that families were separated. He had met brothers and sisters, and that once the wall was built, their mother and father were on the other side of the wall, couldn't see him. Grandmothers couldn't see grandchildren. He was angry. And the crowd was, it was like a riot. It was there was such energy. Took the prepared speech, put it aside, extemporaneous. After he gave the speech, as he's walking off the podium, he walks by Ted Sorensen, his chief speechwriter. And he says, Ted, I think I might have gone a little bit overboard. In other words, communism is an evil system. This was 1963. Kennedy was trying to reach agreement with the Soviet Union with respect to nuclear arms and testing and things of that nature. So the president said to Sorensen, I think I might have gone overboard a little bit. And Sorensen agreed, yes, you did, Mr. President. So they made it a point after that to tone down the rhetoric somewhat. But that was an example of, most people don't know it, that's an example of Jack Kennedy speaking extemporaneously. And it's just, I don't know how he did it, but he was just very, very talented at that point in time. 2 weeks later, actually a month later, he's back in Hyannisport. He's at Dad's house downstairs. Dad had a movie theater set up downstairs where they watch movies, naturally. What else do you do at a movie theater? Is that a grammatical mistake? Did I just make an error? So Kennedy's downstairs. He's watching a film of that speech, the Berlin Wall speech. And he's watching it, and he often critiqued himself. He looked at himself all the time from a third. He's very detached with respect to who he was, his place in the world, and he kind of knew that, in order to improve, he had to have a critical eye of himself. So he watched the speech, and he said, that was so emotionally charged at that point in time. 250,000, 300,000 people in that Rudolph Wall Platz, that's the name of it. It's now called John F. Kennedy Square. Kennedy said, I had the feeling that if I said to those people, let's go over and tear down that wall right now. He was afraid that the mob psychology was such that they would do it. So that was just an example, to me, it was an example of him understanding his power and the power of oratory. And it's what all of us do when we stand up in front of a group of people, is to move people, and hopefully for good. And that's your charge as a Toastmaster. So it was an example to me of Jack Kennedy looking at himself kind of in a third party too, saying, he often said, and after his aides, after they did a two-day tour in Germany, they said they could kind of see where an Adolf Hitler, who had great oratorical powers, could mobilize, but he mobilized for evil. And rhetoric is really meant to be used for good, for truth. That's its foundation. And certainly when Aristotle and Plato debated rhetoric and its role and its use, they came to the conclusion that rhetoric is good and it should be used for good and truthful purposes. So that was an example of Kennedy, I think, at his best in speaking extemporaneously. What I'm going to do here, and the phrase that the president repeated there, and let them come to Berlin, you know, and that's just the way he said it too. He was really very upset. And most people, maybe some history for some younger members, Berlin itself, the city of Berlin, the whole city of Berlin was within the within the area of Germany controlled by the Russians. So even though the United States controlled half of Berlin, the whole city was surrounded by the Russians. So in that speech, when the president said, "You live in a defended island of freedom," he was speaking literally and metaphorically, that they were an island of freedom surrounded by the enemy. So it was very emotional.
Mike, I remember that speech so well. Ich bin ein Berliner. Can you tell us a little bit? First, I want to just say how I was impressed with Kennedy going to Germany. We had been at war with Germany, and Americans and Germans both killed, but yet he went there. After war, we were allies. That was so impressive. Can you tell us about his own Kennedy's experience in the war?
Well, in World War II, he tried to go into combat, and he failed the physical. And he was first assigned as intelligence officer in Washington, D.C. And he had a nickname for himself, and he called himself Shafty.
Shafty.
Shafty, because he felt as if he was getting shafted because he wasn't in the war. He wasn't in combat. And he finally persuaded his father that he wanted to be in combat, and his father then, allowed him to
use his influence.
Use his influence to make sure that he did see combat. And he wanted to be a PT boat commander because the PT boats were highlighted because when MacArthur left Corregidor, he left on a PT boat, and the commander of that PT boat took a tour around the United States trying to influence other young Americans to become PT boat commanders. Of course, Kennedy had a background in nautical
and he loved the water.
And he loved the water anyway, so it was very normal. He was stationed in Brackett Island, Solomon Islands, and Brackett Straits, and that was where the Japanese had run what they call Tokyo Express. They would resupply their troops. PT boats were supposed to go out at night, intercept those destroyers and supply ships, and Kennedy's in August of 1945 was split in two by a Japanese destroyer, and he and his crew. He was heroic after the breakup of the PT-1.
So of the 14 men, 3 died right away, if I remember.
2 died.
2 died.
Two died, and they were 7 days on the islands in the South Pacific before they were rescued. And believe it or not, Jack Kennedy's older brother Joe was also in combat and was a naval pilot in England. He wrote a letter to his brother, Jack, and he said, why didn't you have your engines on? Why didn't you get out of the way? Why didn't you heave to? Why didn't you see that destroyer coming? How did you? So the rivalry that the two boys had, you could see it in the letter that the older brother sent to the younger brother, in spite of the fact that Jack won the Purple Heart and the Navy and Marine Corps Medal for heroics after the PT boat was split in two. And so Kennedy then was discharged from the military with a medical discharge, and his brother Joe stayed on in Europe and flying combat missions. And I believe there was so much of a rivalry between those two young men that Joe Kennedy was given an opportunity to fly a very dangerous mission over the English Channel and bomb an area in France that was heavily fortified. And the Navy was looking for somebody to volunteer to get on a very risky mission, and Joe Kennedy had to be on that Liberator bomber. He had to volunteer for that risky mission. And the plane was filled with 25,000 pounds of TNT, It was meant to get up over the English Channel, and then the pilot and co-pilot were going to bail out, and the plane was supposedly going to be flown by remote control to the heavily fortified area and hit the fortified area. And there was a spontaneous spark that ignited the TNT, and his older brother Joe died.
And of course, John Kennedy became quite the hero after the war, and he used a lot of the PT 109 experience to win
the election.
In
the
Congress,
election.
right,
The
in
father
Congress.
made sure,
Yeah.
the dad made sure that the Reader's Digest did a whole story on the heroic efforts of the PT boat commander.
And wasn't there coconut always associated with this?
Yes,
Do you remember that?
right, yeah. John Kennedy had come across two of the natives,
Yeah.
and he couldn't communicate with them in English, and the only way he could communicate with them was to carve out a little message in the coconut saying, "Come and rescue us,
Right.
Navy."
And then they brought the coconut to the Americans. And
Yes.
They were right, and so he had that coconut, I think, on his desk in
And
the
the
White
Oval
House.
Office. Yes, he did.
Yeah,
Yes,
so,
right.
And I
right.
remember coconuts were being sold during that time. So, and what did the little boy ask him?
Well, it was in, I believe it was in Wisconsin while he was campaigning. I'm not sure if that's a state, but a youngster came up to him and said, "How did you become a war hero?" And he said, "It was easy. They sank my boat."
They sank your
sank
boat.
my boat.
Well, very. And so he was truly a courageous man in peace and in war. Would you say that?
I would say that he, before World War II, his father was the ambassador to the court of St. James. So John Kennedy was.
Yeah.
Do you have another question?
Yeah, let me know. I'm just going to interrupt you again. This is the next clip we're going to hear.
Okay.
It's a little emotional, I think.
Okay.
The President's car is now turning onto Elm Street, and it will be only a matter of minutes before he arrives at the Trade Mart. I was on Stemmons Freeway earlier, and even the freeway was jam-packed with spectators waiting their chance to see the President as he made his way toward the Trade Mart. It appears as though something has happened in the motorcade route. Something, I repeat, has happened in the motorcade route. There's numerous people running up the hill alongside Elm Street, there by the Stemmons Freeway. Several police officers are rushing up the hill at this time. Stand by just a moment, please. Something has happened in the motorcade route. Stand by, please. Parkland Hospital, there has been a shooting. Parkland Hospital has been advised to stand by for a severe gunshot wound. I repeat, a shooting in the motorcade in the downtown area. Parkland Hospital has been advised to stand by for a severe gunshot wound. The President's car is now going past me. The limousine is now traveling at a very high rate of speed. Secret Service men standing up in the limousine. They are armed with submachine guns. It appears as though someone in the limousine might have been hit by the gunfire.
President John F. Kennedy died at approximately 1 o'clock Central Standard Time today here in Dallas. He died of gunshot wound in the brain. Dr. Berkeley told me it's a simple matter, Tom, of a bullet right through the head.
Well, I'm
Very
glad we
dramatic.
didn't have any pictures, but we all remember that. And
Sure.
I think you as a boy. And the great question that we ask to this day, it's 50 years since his presidency.
50 years, yeah.
And we always ask, where were you when John Kennedy was assassinated? And I'm going to ask you that question now, and you
Sure.
could ask me too.
Oh, great. Well, I was a grade school boy, and in the 8th grade, and I can remember the principal coming into the classroom and telling the teacher that the president had been shot. And I, as a little boy, I thought they said shock. President was in shock, and I thought that was a little unusual. And then finally, everybody knew that the president was shot and the president was dead. So we were dismissed from school, as I think most school kids were throughout the country. And I remember that weekend as a very, particularly even for a young kid, I knew that something really bad had happened. Very bad it happened. How about yourself?
Yeah, and I was at the University of Illinois in Chicago in a chemistry class, and Dr. Parade came in and she said, the president has been assassinated. She talked for a few minutes and she said, I think we should end the class.
Yeah.
And I remember taking a bus in Chicago back home, and everyone on that bus was silent. And I remember my father, who really loved Franklin Delano Roosevelt, just for 3 or 4 days was silent in his chair. And you often said that about fathers and mothers. Would you
Sure.
repeat that?
Well, a lot of times after I do a speech or perform in front of a group, it's really, people have a need then to come up and tell me where they were when the president was assassinated. And I hear more often than not from men, particularly, it was the only time that they saw their father cry, was that particular occasion. Very moving, very emotional.
And now there's the torch, which is still in Arlington. Have you ever visited Arlington?
No, I haven't. I've been in Washington, D.C. today. No, I haven't been over to Arlington. No, I haven't.
And I was there, and then I was at his home recently on Beale Street in Brookline.
Sure.
And even there, I had tears in my eyes listening to his mother talk about John Kennedy.
Sure, in the kitchen.
And Teddy Roosevelt, when he did his own inaugural, 3 presidents had died in a matter of about 30 years. Lincoln, Garfield, and McKinley. And he said how profound it was for the nation that 3 presidents in this short time died. And McKinley was assassinated in 1901, and then Kennedy, 63. And of course, thank God we haven't had one now.
Right.
But yet it is a profound emotional impact on the whole nation.
Sure.
And I still think it lingers. And as I was talking to that gal this morning who was 23, she talked about the assassination.
Right.
That's what she remembered.
Sure. I visited Dealey Plaza, too. I went down to a conference down in Dallas and visited Dealey Plaza. I happened to be there during, right around, it was a week before the November 22nd anniversary. And it's kind of macabre to be down there at that point in time. And quite a few tourists, quite a few. And people selling wares and books and videos and but people are drawn to it. People are still drawn to it. The echo still lingers. There's no two ways about it.
And if you go to Washington, D.C. at the Ford Theater, you can see where Lincoln was assassinated, and you look up there, and I've been there, and I also had an emotional response to that. And I remember the clock in the lobby was stopped, I think, at 7:22 when he died, and that was a traditional practice to do during those days. So now we're going to the sort of final question about what does this all mean to you, and what do you want to do? It's obvious that you have the ability to portray John Kennedy. You have the ability to sound like him. What's the next step for you?
Well, what's missing is I don't look like him. And as I perform, I realize that in order to bring the character back to life fully and completely, I would have to take my professional development to another level. So I took it upon myself to go out to Los Angeles, and I met with a makeup artist, Kevin Haney, and he's well known in Hollywood, and he's won an Academy Award, 6 Emmys, and he has a special ability to transform people into different characters. And there's an actor out in Los Angeles named Steve Bridges, and Steve Bridges is from Texas, and he was moved to Los Angeles. And Steve Bridges contracted with Kevin Haney, and he said to Kevin Haney, I want you to make me look like Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Arnold Schwarzenegger. So
They give him muscles too? Or?
Well, they could do anything they want. They could do anything they want. So he transformed him into Schwarzenegger, and then he made Steve Bridges into Bill Clinton.
Bill Clinton.
He made a prosthetic device for him for Bill Clinton. He also then made Steve Bridges into George Bush. And that was wildly popular in the early 2000s when President Bush was first elected. So once I saw Kevin Haney could do this, I decided myself to go out to California, and I met with Kevin Haney. And
You're a bit taller than him. And,
I was standing very tall while I was out there. And Kevin, he and I agreed, and he's now in the process of doing some
and here's
some
a
work for
picture
me.
of you right over there. He's working on your nose, and you have your head and body covered. That's very. So what happened there? What's happening right there?
Well, I don't know all the technical terms. I just know that Kevin has. He has the skill and the ability to transform anybody into a different character, and he's in the process now of doing the sculpture work for me to actually.
Here's a good picture of you.
Yeah, that's
it's a death mask almost. You could call it that.
I don't look too happy.
What is the blue made out of?
It's silicone. That's silicone. Yeah, silicone.
Okay.
They put it all. It's all over your face, and you can just breathe through your nose. So you have to be pretty patient, very calm. And he did the silicone, and then they put plaster on the outside.
Here's a good picture of the.
Now
there you look like a mummy head.
Well, believe me,
and you have holes for your nostrils.
That's it. That's it.
And what happens if you got panicky?
Well, Kevin says before you begin, and he was pretty serious about this too. He said, when I ask you a question, don't open your mouth because you can't speak. But this, up and down means yes, that means no. And he said, if you're really in trouble, put your hands right up straight in the air like a touchdown, and we'll take the prosthetic device off. I made it, though. I made it.
Yeah. Well, it looked very good. Yeah. And then what's the next step? You're going to have to put before every performance.
Yes.
You'll have to.
Yes.
Make your face up.
That's absolutely correct. And so I'll have to have he has a makeup artist out here in the Boston area that can assist me in that. And so I'm hoping, as you said, I may have all of the attributes, but I didn't have a look of John Kennedy. And through modern technology and the great artistry of somebody like Kevin Haney, I can have that.
And how long do you think it'll take to make you up before every performance?
I'm not sure, but I meant to ask Kevin while I was out there. I think of more questions while I'm on the way back home than I do when I'm out there. So I have to write them down. I think about an hour and a half.
And
2
also
hours.
Your hair, there'll be a wig. Also.
Yeah, there'll be a wig, and that's all part of the.
Now there are a lot of audience members out there this evening saying this guy is crazy.
They're right.
They're right. But you're willing to take this risk.
It's a passion.
And to spend probably a considerable amount of money to
More
do
money
this.
than I expected
and also to prepare and then to take it off. It must be a couple hours to take everything off.
Yeah.
And you have to put in a box and everything.
It has to be maintained, and the wig has to be cleaned and maintained too.
Yeah.
Yes.
I just want to spend a few more moments with you talking about what it means to you to portray Teddy. There again, I'm in my character, John Kennedy.
Yeah.
What does it mean to you?
Well, what happened was, Ted, I realized as a kid that the speeches were beautiful, but as I got older and I realized the contribution that he made and all of the other people of that generation, and he absolutely inspired all those people. And from a practical standpoint, there's no one else that portrays John Kennedy. And there are many, as you know, historical reenactors who look like certain characters and can play those characters. So there's nobody that does John Kennedy. The words are beautiful, the speeches are beautiful, and if I can bring that man back to life 50 years after his death, then I'm going to try it. I'm going to try it as hard as I can. It's passion.
And John Kennedy loved history.
Very much so.
And can you just give a quick example of how he loved history?
Well, as a young boy, that's all he did. That's all he did was read books on history. And his mother was the one that took him throughout Boston to all the historic sites. And John Kennedy, it was known if you were with John Kennedy, if you passed a historical marker, you had to stop the car because he wanted to get out and read the historical marker. He wanted to know what took place at that point in time.
Well, what we both do, Teddy Roosevelt and John Kennedy, are magnificent men to play. I'd like you to look right into the camera and leave us with some special words from John Kennedy.
Okay. Do not pray for easy lives. Pray to be stronger men.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Good questions. Perfect. Great ending. Great ending. Shows
In the long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its hour of maximum danger.